Over the last few decades, a multi-billion-dollar industry has developed. I'll call it the escape industry. I'm talking about the best-selling books that tell you to eat, pray, and love your way around the world. The getaways and escape packages, white sand beaches in Bali, those 2 weeks of rest, relaxation, and companionship that we spend the rest of our year dreaming about. The escape industry thrives because of a culture of overwork. Its products are band-aids for the stress, loneliness, exhaustion, and constant consumption that have come to dominate our lives. It wasn't always like this. For older generations, a good job was one that let you build a life. Most jobs were in manufacturing, and there was pride to be found in making things that were useful. But that real sense of belonging came from your family and your community. You worked to live. But for my generation, Generation Y, and for those younger, work has taken on a whole new meaning. We don't just want a steady job. We want to do what we love. We want a career. We want to belong, just like our parents did, but we've been told that the way to express who we are is through our career. And this means taking just one tiny part of ourselves and turning it into our whole identities. It means multiple jobs, which require extensive training, often in places that mean we have to move away from the communities that we grew up in. We're living to work. Countless studies over the last decade have revealed the harm that this is causing us. Public health researchers have identified what they've termed an epidemic of loneliness, with 18 to 34-year-olds the loneliest group of all. The polling company Gallup tells us that only 13% of people are happy in their jobs. And the economist and politician Andrew Leigh has found that Australians have stopped joining things. We're not joining churches, sporting clubs, unions, or political parties anymore. And he's also found that we have fewer friends, that we're less connected with our neighbours, and that we're less likely to volunteer. It's no coincidence that in this culture of living to work, the escape industry is booming. Because even if, like me, you're one of the lucky few who do like your job, we still dream of escape. And that's because the things that make life worth living just can't be found in work. If you read the accounts of staff in nursing homes who've sat at the bedsides of thousands of people, they tell us that no one ever wishes that they'd worked more. It's those precious hours with family and with friends that make life meaningful. It may also be a creative idea, a project, a sport, something outside of the narrow confines of what we've translated into a career. We've limited ourselves because of a belief that the only valid way that we can contribute, the only way to belong in our society is through your job. Expensive life coaches and whirlwind backpacking trips around India aren't going to break us out of this culture of living to work. What we need is freedom from work. And to achieve that, we need a movement. This isn't a new idea. Australia was once governed by the Masters and Servants Act, and under that act, an employer could send the police to hunt after their employees if they were gone from work for even an hour without permission. And then when the police brought the employee back, the employer could choose to imprison them or even to torture them. We changed our society through a movement for freedom. We went from the 16-hour to the 12-hour day, and then it was Australian workers who were the first in the world to win the 8-hour day with no loss of pay. Within 100 years, we'd halved our work week. The 8-hour day was not supposed to be the end point. The movement was never supposed to end there. All of the great leaders and thinkers, from Karl Marx to John Maynard Keynes, all thought that as we developed technology, we'd liberate ourselves further from work. In fact, Keynes even thought that by 2020 we'd have a 15-hour work week. But then, just when Gen Ys like me were being born, the movement for freedom was stalled by trickle-down economics. The belief that exponential wealth for the few will somehow end up benefiting all of us. As a result, we grew up in a culture that says that productivity is next to godliness, that describes human beings as human capital or human resources without the faintest trace of irony. Manufacturing jobs are gone, and in their place we've got corporate consulting and investment banking. It's now normal for young people to go straight from university into corporate firms, where they'll spend the rest of their 20s working 60-hour work weeks, and those are the good jobs. My generation are working harder than ever. We've cut down on the part of life that makes us happy and keeps us healthy. And for what? So that we can generate profits for executives who earn 150 times the average worker's salary. To create a world where 8 men are richer than the poorest 3.6 billion people, where only the tiniest fraction of any of this wealth that we've created ever comes back to us through taxes, and where those freedoms that our parents and grandparents won and fought for are under constant attack. So what's happened to the movement for freedom? Well, it's been mostly abandoned by many of our unions. They focus on jobs as ends in themselves, which leads us to this absurd position where technology that could liberate us from work, that could make our lives better, is seen as a threat, and where failing industries have to have billions of dollars of government spending pumped into them, even industries that are destroying our environment so that people can keep their jobs, instead of presenting another way that people could live. So, how can we change the nature of the game? Well, you don't have to be a full-on communist revolutionary to see the sense in Marx's vision of workers owning the means of production. And by the means of production, I mean factories, energy supply, land, equipment, tools, all of the things that we need to make what we need. Add modern technology to this, and Keynes's 15-hour work week actually is achievable today. Take Uber, for example. Uber has made $68 billion by taking a cut of each transaction, and that's all sitting in the pockets of a few rich people. But if Uber were a worker-owned platform, every Uber driver could earn a lot more while working a lot less. There are cooperative versions of Uber already springing up all around the world, along with cooperative versions of eBay, Airbnb, and even consulting firms. We can absolutely afford to invest in these to make them into credible alternatives. Our unions, our super funds, our governments can afford it. It only cost $50 million to bring Uber to scale. A universal basic income is critical. A society that truly values human beings is one that supports everyone, no matter their job status. And basic income trials are already underway in Finland and Canada right now. We also have to consume less, and that's a moral choice, but working less will help us, because with less work, there's a lot less need for things like prepackaged food, takeaway, expensive clothes, gym memberships, petrol, dog walkers, house cleaners, nannies, the list goes on. And that in turn, of course, means that we're creating less work for others to have to do. With automation and massive job losses around the corner, there's going to be a lot of suffering if we can't break out of this culture of living to work. And our environment, which, much like our lives, is being destroyed for profit, isn't going to hold up either. What I've suggested are just a few of many, many options that we could consider, but the fundamental choice that we have to make is one of values. We can spend our lives continuing to generate grotesque profits for the few, or we can build a real sharing economy. We can be lonely and exhausted in our McMansions and our new cars. Or we can really take the time to care for ourselves and for each other. We can eat joyfully, we can pray or dream often, and we can practice love for ourselves, for our friends, for our family, for our communities daily. Because when it comes to deciding how to spend the majority of this very short time that each of us has here on earth, there's no such thing as a good job. But we can choose to live good lives. Thank you.